They found his car still running. Cold cases don't arrive with urgency. They're moved over silently and digitally. Just a click of a button, and a case that's gone unsolved becomes mine. The weight of my cases is measured in years. My name is Dennisy, and I'm one of the 3 detectives that work in the cold case unit. We're the basement dwellers, but I enjoy working with the ghosts of the past. When you actually solve one, it's an unmatched gift to give someone the answers they've been desperate for so long. Daniel's case came to me this morning, 9 years after the fact. His file had gotten buried under new cases, and then the detective on the case retired. Eventually, it found its way to me. The folder was thin. That's usually the first sign of why the case became mine to begin with. Thin files mean no violence, no stack of photos, no lab work that's worth mentioning. The label had been typed, and over time it had yellowed and the ink had faded. Daniel's family had checked in every week for updates until his mom passed away 3 years ago. He has siblings, 2 of them, and his dad is still alive, but the family was shattered and everyone lives in a different state. Daniel disappeared in October, almost a decade ago. According to his ex-wife Ellen, he left their house at 7:10 a.m. He was wearing a gray coat and brown shoes. He took his breakfast in a Tupperware box, kissed Ellen's cheek, and said that he would be home late due to a quarterly review at work. She remembered the detail about the quarterly review because he had been rehearsing his presentation out loud over and over again until she started to tease him. At 10 a.m., people in his office noticed that his desk was still empty. By noon, calling his cell phone went straight to voicemail. Much later that day, a parking enforcement officer doing a routine sweep noticed a sedan idling in a downtown parking garage. The engine was running, the headlights were on, but the driver's seat was empty and the car was unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle. In the handful of photos that I had, everything looked completely normal. It looked as if Daniel had just gotten out of the car and walked away. But his mom and wife adamantly did not believe he would leave this way by choice. Security footage showed Daniel entering the parking garage and then sitting in his car for an hour and a half. There's nothing weird about it except the fact that he's not getting out of the car. And then, just as he opens the door to get out, the footage goes black. I watched that footage a dozen times and didn't see anything new. It was an hour and a half, but not even a shoe came into frame that I could try to work off of. Daniel had vanished in the 6-minute window when the security cameras went black. When the video starts up again, his car is there just exactly as it was, but Daniel is gone without a trace. The original detectives on the case had done their work thoroughly. His financials were clean. He had no gambling debts or hidden accounts. His credit cards had no activity after that morning. His bank accounts remained untouched afterwards. His passport was in a drawer at home. His phone last pinged inside the garage stairwell. There were no signs of any struggle or evidence of flight. There was just absence. Adults are allowed to disappear. That phrase appears in nearly every cold case file like this. Sometimes someone writes it in a margin or speaks it aloud in an interview. And legally, it's true, but emotionally, it's useless. Ellen Harris filed the missing person report the evening that Daniel didn't make it home. She arrived that night at the police station and gave a list of people that Daniel had talked about or seen in the last few weeks. She was cleared from any suspicion the following week. The case stalled because there was nowhere else to go. Daniel didn't fit the categories that keep investigations alive. He wasn't unstable. He wasn't vulnerable. He had never hurt anyone. There was no evidence of criminal activity. Eventually, his name became a line in a database. His wife became his ex-wife, and his mother dedicated the years she had left to finding him and never letting Daniel's name be forgotten. And now, 9 years later, I was looking at a receipt buried amongst loose papers, part of the casework. 3 months after Daniel disappeared, someone rented a storage unit under his name and paid in cash. Police did discover this, but the unit had been basically emptied before anyone noticed it existed. I had photographs of the few paltry things left behind. Some used but empty garbage bags, a hand trolley, a well-worn pair of athletic sneakers, and a folded city transit map with an ink mark next to one of the bus routes. But that route didn't lead anywhere remarkable. It ended in a residential neighborhood 30 minutes from his home. I stared at that map for hours, marking off any points of interest, but the truth was, I didn't even know if the person who had rented the storage unit was Daniel or someone just using his ID. I sat at my desk, staring at the map in front of me as I nursed a barely warm coffee. I decided sitting at the station wasn't going to help me. So I got my jacket, and I drove to the neighborhood. I knocked on doors with a name and photo no one remembered or recognized. Most people shook their heads politely, and one elderly woman kept me talking for 20 minutes. I learned she has 4 cats, 6 sisters, 2 brothers, and she invited me to lunch sometime. I was peopled out when I knocked on the last door on the block. It had started lightly raining, and I was craving the warmth of my car. So far, no one had anything to offer me but polite smiles and shoulder shrugs. A woman in, I would guess, her mid-60s answered the door. She looked at the photo for a long time. "I remember him," she nodded. "But his name was Harry. I'm sure of it." "How do you know him?" I asked. "He rented my basement for a few months. He was a good young man, very quiet. He paid in cash every month without fail. He was never any bother." "Did he ever have any visitors?" The woman shook her head. "Not that I was ever aware of." "Why did he leave?" "I don't know. He just left one day and never came back. He left the basement spotless and left cash on the table to cover the end of the month." The woman then looked up at me, sharply, abruptly. "Has he done something wrong?" "No, he hasn't. He's actually a missing person. I'm trying to find him." She explained that he left no forwarding address and no explanation, but the time he spent in her basement matched the time someone had rented a storage unit in his name. Given no signs of a struggle and this new information, I felt that Daniel was alive for at least 3 months after his disappearance, based on the records from the storage facility and the recollection of his temporary landlord. Back in my office, I spread Daniel's life across the conference table like a blueprint. Everything I could find out about him, I did. He planned everything. He was organized and kept a diary of sorts of appointments, meetings, and social outings. Coworkers described him as reliable, quiet, and competent. No one remembered him ever raising his voice. No one remembered him standing out for really any reason. He kept his head down, did his job, and went home again. I arranged to talk to Ellen. She seemed surprised to hear from me, but agreed to meet. I had talked to thousands of relatives of victims of crime, and knew to handle the situation with care. I explained who I was and asked her to come in to talk. She was there in an hour. She had moved on, married someone else, and had children. Her life had continued, but she still wanted answers. He liked order, she told me. Not control, just order. She looked tired, and her purse had a juice box sticking out the top. I asked about any arguments they might have had. She had been asked before, but I asked again. Daniel was soft at heart. We had disagreements, but we didn't fight. He was far more likely to just retreat. And for some reason, that word, retreat, followed me back to my desk after our conversation. Retreat doesn't necessarily look like panic. Panic is sloppy, but retreating could mean planning. Maybe the running car wasn't an accident. Leaving the engine on guaranteed discovery hours or days earlier than if the car had just been abandoned cold. The bus map obviously told me he didn't drive away. He chose public transportation, and faces disappear on buses. He marked a route. Well, maybe he had marked a route that ended nowhere memorable. I put in a Hail Mary request for transit footage from the week he had vanished. Most of it was long gone, and I won't bore you with the weeks of bureaucracy, paperwork, and sheer hope that something had survived. The only way it would have is if some other crime had been committed in the same station on the same day he was there. But in the end, surprisingly, one grainy clip survived. There was a record of that bus station on that day, at roughly the time I suspected. A man boarded a bus in a gray coat, holding a bag with his head down. My report avoided conclusions. It just arranged the facts carefully. Daniel did not seem to have died on October 12th. It was my belief that he did not act impulsively, but instead exited his life deliberately. I didn't know if he was still alive now, but I did feel with some certainty that he was alive for up to 5 months after he disappeared and left his car with the engine running in the parking garage. I emailed Ellen a copy of my report with a note offering to talk. She never called, but I don't blame her. Answers are heavy, and I still hadn't given her the ultimate answer that mattered. I couldn't tell her if Daniel was living a new life somewhere or not. I couldn't tell her if he was alive. I couldn't tell her why he had left, if he had. Cold cases don't always end with closure. Sometimes they end with accepting that we won't know. And with that, I thought I had put Daniel to rest. The file was neat, my notes thorough, the paperwork completed. But some things refuse to stay resting, especially when you've been in cold cases long enough to know that unless there's a body found, dead or alive, the case is never truly resolved. It's just put back in the closed folder and left to collect dust. I hated these cases the most. I'm a person who needs answers, and I can't relax or let things go if I don't understand and have unanswered questions. I do try for acceptance, but the slightest thing will reactivate all my curiosity and open that file again. It started with a call from a transit supervisor. Angie had been reviewing some surveillance footage for an unrelated police inquiry when a frame caught her eye. A certain man boarding a bus, the same one I had circled in my report. I had circulated Daniel's image everywhere I could, and she thought she spotted him. But the catch was, this was recent footage, a week ago. I felt the pull of unease in my stomach. Maybe Daniel hadn't disappeared into thin air, but instead was still moving along that bus line. I drove to that station the following morning before dawn and staked it out. I waited in my car, my notebook in my lap, watching buses pull up and glide past and people shuffling aboard and off of them in silence. I didn't see a hint of his familiar face, but in my gut, I felt like this was something. I had closed the case on paper, but I felt now like maybe I had been wrong to close the file. I staked out that bus station at the start of the day and the end for multiple days. I went to every place we knew he was on the day he disappeared, and I even staked out the storage units a couple of times. I just had a very strong sixth sense that he was alive and he was still nearby, but I was running out of places to look for him when the anonymous email arrived. The sender's name was John Doe, and the subject line read Daniel Harris. The entire body of the email was one line: "He's closer than you think." I returned to Ellen's house. She hadn't called, and I knew I was opening old wounds, but I just couldn't let Daniel state a name in a missing persons file. I had questions she might be able to answer. Not about why he left, she didn't know, but about anything that might have made him feel trapped. Any subtle signs she might have noticed only because she loved him. Well, he had complained about stress at work, she told me. He was really stressed about the quarterly review, and he had started waking up early and taking walks, like before work, like really early. And the other thing I noticed, he had stopped using his phone in front of me. She looked at her hands in her lap. I don't know what made him leave or what happened, but I need closure. I need this to be over. Back at the office, I sat in a grim silence. It was possible that Daniel was still out there causing all this pain, this effort and time investigation, and yet living quietly himself. Maybe he had no idea anyone was still looking. I wondered if he even knew about his mom's passing. I replied to the anonymous email saying, "If you know where Daniel is and he's safe, please have him let us know, for Ellen's peace of mind. He's not in any trouble." I signed my name, Detective Kira Dennisy, and sat staring at my screen. I put all the photos, statements, and reports back into Daniel's file and went back to chasing leads on other cases. It was 8 days later when I got a call from Ellen. Daniel had called her. He was safe and very sorry. He explained that the more time that went by, the more ashamed of himself he felt for wanting to escape from his life. Eventually coming back, even years later, just to apologize, felt impossible. It doesn't take away any of the pain that was felt, but I'm glad to say 9 years and 254 days later, Daniel Harris is no longer a missing person or a cold case. If you enjoyed this reading, please hit like and subscribe so you don't miss future stories. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. This has been Tales by Rachel, where we breathe life into every story.